The sun was already melting into the red horizon when Dax Mercer first saw the dust. A thin gray plume rising beyond the ridge, steady and unnatural, the kind that didn't come from cattle or storm. He set his hat against the wind and stared through the augmented lenses built into his shades. The overlay flickered, focusing. Construction drones, half a dozen of them, crawling like silver beetles across his land. His land. For a moment he thought maybe Aquagen had sent maintenance bots for the underground irrigation systems, but the signal signature wasn't familiar. He tapped his wrist console, running a field scan. Unauthorized transmissions. Non-Aquagen encryption. Then came the sound. The whine of hydraulic claws and the grind of metal teeth against the hard-baked soil. Dax swung into his rover, the kind of machine built before the world went fully synthetic. Heavy tires, real steel. It roared across the cracked plain as dust kicked up behind him like smoke from an old war. The closer he got, the more furious he felt. His ranch wasn't just land, it was the last thing left of his father's legacy, of a time before the corporations fenced the sky with satellites and sold rain by the liter. He hit the brakes at the ridge, gravel spraying underfoot, and climbed out. Down below, near the dry creek bed, a dozen drones had already dug a trench wide enough to swallow a truck. Thick, gleaming pipeline coils unrolled into it, fed by cargo skiffs hovering above the dirt. And standing near the edge, in a suit too clean for the desert, was a man with a glowing clipboard and a face that screamed bureaucracy. "Hey!" Dax shouted, sliding down the slope. The man turned lazily, as if annoyed someone had interrupted his evening. "What the hell do you think you're doing on my property?" The man raised an eyebrow, tapping the tablet. "This is Section 18A. Under reclamation for the Hydro Operations Authority, authorized infrastructure expansion." His voice was slick, like he'd practiced it 100 times. "Pipeline installation, projected completion in 72 hours. Reclamation." Dax spat the word out like poison. "You're digging through my land without notice." He gestured at the ranch behind him, miles of scorched earth and solar cattle fences glinting in the fading sun. "You people think because it's dirt and solar panels, it doesn't matter." The man barely looked up. "All proper filings were processed through regional governance. Perhaps you missed the notice." "I don't miss things on my own land," Dax said, stepping closer. His boots crunched against the dry soil. The drones slowed, their sensors scanning him but not stopping. "Now, you're going to shut these down before I do it myself." The man's smirk didn't waver. "If you interfere with an HOA operation, you'll be in violation of federal property disruption statutes. That's a Class 3 offense. I suggest you take your concerns to the city office." The words hit Dax like a slap, not because they were unfamiliar, but because they came from someone who had no idea who he was. He glanced at the massive pipeline segment, a new model, carbon-threaded composite, designed for ultra-pressurized transfer. This wasn't local maintenance. This was big, expensive, and far beyond what a regional WA should be able to afford. He took a breath, his anger tightening into focus. "You've got exactly 5 minutes to get your drones out of here." The foreman sighed, touched his earpiece, and said, "Unit 47, deploy security mode." The nearest drone pivoted, a warning light flashing red. "Sir, please remove yourself from the work zone." Dax held his ground. "You people think paperwork makes you gods." He turned his gaze on the trench, watching the bright blue waterline connectors being sealed by robot welders. "You have no idea what you're tampering with." For the first time, the foreman hesitated. "It's just a water line, old man." Dax smiled coldly. "Nothing about water is just anymore." He walked back to his rover, boots echoing, the setting sun painting the machines in molten gold. Behind him, the drones continued their work, oblivious. He didn't bother looking back when he revved the engine. He'd seen enough. By the time he reached the ranch house, the sky had turned purple and the stars had begun to burn through the haze. His house stood alone, half buried in the desert wind, surrounded by old wind towers and glowing data antennas. Inside, the place was simple. Dusty walls, old family photos, a map of the original property line etched into real paper. But beneath that surface, in the sublevel carved into stone, lived an entirely different world. He descended the stairs, lights flickering on automatically. The room hummed with the sound of servers, quiet and rhythmic, like heartbeats. The central console glowed as he approached, scanning his retina before opening access. A soft voice greeted him, smooth and familiar. "Welcome back, Mr. Mercer. Unauthorized excavation detected in Sector 3. Shall I activate surveillance?" "Do it," he said. A dozen hollow screens lit up, showing drone feeds, ground sensors, and aerial views of the construction site. Dax zoomed in on the logo printed on one of the transport ships, Hydro Operations Authority. He snorted. A local water management firm with more power than sense. But what caught his attention was the authorization signature on the permit data he hacked, Marla Vex, HOA's president. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. Marla Vex, the same woman who'd tried to buy his land 5 years ago under the guise of water research access. The same woman who'd once sat in an Aquagen shareholders meeting, before she'd been forced out for embezzlement. Dax brought up his encrypted link to Aquagen's internal network. His hidden credentials flickered alive, codes and keys buried under layers of shell corporations. He opened the regional distribution matrix, the one that mapped every liter of water in Neo-Texas. HOA's new pipeline appeared as an unauthorized branch, attempting to reroute through rural supply channels. "Stealing water," Dax murmured. "Still playing the same old game." He stared at the holographic pipeline stretching through his land, glowing like a wound across the grid. Then he opened another file, the one that still bore his name, Primary Shareholder Authorization, Aquagen Industries. The foreman's words echoed in his head. "It's just a water line, old man." He smiled, a slow, cold thing. Not for long. Outside, the night settled deep over the desert. The drones continued digging, their lights shimmering across the sand. But somewhere beneath them, through networks invisible to the human eye, Aquagen's systems were already stirring, ancient protocols waiting for their owner's command. Dax keyed a final code into the console, his voice steady as he said, "Begin silent monitoring. No interference yet, let them finish the pipeline. I want to see where their arrogance leads." "Confirmed," the AI replied softly. "Surveillance active." He looked out the window toward the horizon, where tiny construction lights blinked like insects in the dark. The stars reflected faintly in his eyes. "They think they're stealing water," he whispered. "They're digging their own graves." And as the first gust of wind swept across the empty plains, the system beneath the ranch came alive with quiet purpose, preparing for a storm no one in the WA could yet imagine. Morning broke over the ranch like a blade of light cutting through the desert mist. The horizon shimmered with heat. Before the sun even cleared the dunes, and Dax Mercer was already awake, boots in the dirt, coffee steaming on the railing of his porch. His eyes never left the trench in the distance. From this far, it looked like a scar, a silver vein running through his land, feeding something dark and unseen beneath the sand. The night's data feeds had confirmed what he already suspected. The HOA's operation wasn't just a local upgrade. The scope was massive, pulling unregistered resources from deep reservoirs only accessible through corporate infrastructure. Someone had hacked into Aquagen's archives to access the maps. Someone who knew exactly what they were stealing. He turned his wrist console toward the rising sun, watching as the display shimmered to life. A voice, low and smooth, came through his earpiece. "Intrusion trace complete. Origin point matches Hydro Operations Authority Central Hub. Encryption sequence resembles Aquagen Class G framework." "Class G," Dax muttered. "That's proprietary tech. They couldn't have built that themselves." "No, sir," the AI said. "It was copied." Dax's jaw clenched. That meant an inside leak. One of his own engineers, or someone who'd once worked for Aquagen before the corporate restructuring. It had happened before. Years ago, during the water rights wars, Aquagen had been torn apart from the inside by spies, regulators, and rival corporations. That was when Dax had vanished, letting the board believe he'd died in an orbital accident. He hadn't corrected them. Sometimes power worked best when it was invisible. He went back inside the ranch house, past the faded photos of his wife and son, long gone to another colony, far from this dust-choked place. The past was a ghost that didn't speak, and Dax had learned not to answer. Down in the sublevel, the hum of the servers welcomed him like old friends. "Pull the executive chain," he said to the system. "I want to see who's been moving money through Aquagen's rural contracts." One by one, holographic documents floated into the air, account transfers, fake invoices, disguised supply orders. The HOA wasn't just building a pipeline. They were diverting Aquagen water to private reserves, selling it off-market to luxury habitats on the coast. And they were using stolen credentials from Aquagen's own network to authorize the shipments. Dax zoomed in on a digital signature and stopped. The ID tag glowed faint blue, pulsing faintly, Marla Vex. He leaned back in the chair, his expression unreadable. So she finally crawled back. Years ago, Marla had been one of Aquagen's brightest directors, overseeing resource logistics for half the southern grid. She'd been brilliant, ambitious, and ruthless. When the board discovered her siphoning profits through phantom projects, Dax had been the one to bury the evidence instead of destroying her. He'd thought he was showing mercy. Now she was the head of the very authority trying to gut his land. Pull her communications log, he ordered. The system obeyed. A list of encrypted transmissions filled the air, time stamps, signal origins, destinations across the arcology networks. But one caught his eye. A call to a name he hadn't seen in years, Castle Dynamics. Dax exhaled slowly. Castle Dynamics had been Aquagen's biggest rival before the merger. They specialized in tech, drone hardware, military-grade AI, and, more dangerously, political leverage. If Marla was talking to them, this wasn't just about water. It was about control. Whoever owned the water supply owned civilization itself. He stood, pacing the room, boots echoing against the steel floor. She's trying to reroute our infrastructure to her own system, he muttered. A parallel network, independent from Aquagen oversight. The AI spoke, softly. Would you like to initiate legal action, sir? Dax laughed, humorless. The law's what people like her pay to write. He paused, then added, no, not yet. He climbed the stairs again, stepping into the morning glare. Across the plain, the HOA drones were still at work, tireless and mechanical. He watched one cut through a fence, scanning the soil before laying another segment of pipe. The arrogance of it all almost made him smile. He returned to the rover and drove into town. The small settlement of High Mesa wasn't much. A few modular buildings, a gas bar that served recycled caffeine, and a water distribution node manned by an old friend. Jonas Hale was sitting behind the counter when Dax walked in, boots dusty and eyes sharp as ever. Been a while, Jonas said, leaning back in his chair. You come to buy or to bite? Neither, Dax replied. Need access to the city's data relay. HOA's building a new line through my property. Jonas's grin faded. I heard. Folks say it's just an upgrade. You don't think so? Dax shook his head. They're stealing Aquagen tech, using black market access codes. I need the relay to confirm who's backing them. Jonas hesitated, then stood. You always did walk into hornet nests.